Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Rutherford Hayes. The focus is politician. The year is 1865. It's June 8th, 4 years to the day after Hayes had initially enlisted in the Union Army. He was now being discharged, and he was doing it with an extra bonus. He was promoted one last time, a brevet promotion to Major General. He would end the war with 2 stars on his shoulder as a bit of an honorarium for the Congressman to be able to going out on this high note. It was his 4th promotion since the war began, perhaps fitting to go with the 4 wounds that he suffered in battle during his tenure in the Civil War. It'd be a few months before Hayes would actually have to travel to Washington, D.C., so he had some quiet time at home alone with the family. Before the war, Hayes had gotten his first political job as the city solicitor in Cincinnati. That was a start, but now he's ready to pivot, and politics was about to be his career. And things were rather tumultuous going on in Washington, D.C. Andrew Johnson had taken over as president in the wake of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. And Johnson had in his mind what he called presidential reconstruction, a path to get the South reconciled back in the Union as quickly as possible, their rights reestablished, including the ability to have their seats back in Congress. The radical Republicans, though, who dominated that legislature, had a very different view in mind. They kind of wanted to punish the rebels. They wanted to impose some very strict requirements in terms of how they were going to have to treat the freedmen, the free blacks, now that the 13th Amendment has been passed and the blacks have been freed. And so there's a lot of tension when Hayes shows up in December of 1865 to join the House of Representatives on this conflict between the different ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, which version of Reconstruction was going to take place. Now, Hayes was a very loyal Republican, and he was pretty much a loyal vote throughout a lot of this time, but he was not really aligned to the radical side of the Republican Party. Folks like Thaddeus Stevens, who were really pushing this aggressive agenda, not only with the South, but against the man in the White House, Andrew Johnson. Nevertheless, Hayes was a consistent vote in favor of this idea of keeping the seceded states and their members of Congress not seated until more requirements had been met. Hayes said the rebel states, having gone into insurrection and lost their lawful state governments, it is for the lawmaking power, i.e. Congress, not the president of the nation, to say when or whether such new state governments have been set up as ought to be recognized. I went with the majority of the party in favor of getting as much power away from the rebels as possible. It was a 2-term congressman for Rutherford Hayes, and again, it was a tumultuous time, a lot of conflict between the members of his body, the House of Representatives, and Andrew Johnson. They eventually impeached Johnson toward the end of his term. But this really was not the focus of Hayes. What was his job? Well, he was the chair of the Congressional Library Committee. What did that mean? Well, his job was to oversee the Library of Congress, and one of his big accomplishments was the migration of a whole bunch of books from the Smithsonian Institution to the Library of Congress. He did have other duties. He was a very consistent advocate for war veterans, his own constituents. He was supportive of the 14th Amendment, another amendment coming forward to try to get more rights regardless of race. But he was not as aggressive in pushing things as were many of the members of the radical wing of the party. One of the things that Hayes was most happy about is Lucy, his wife, was with him just about the entire time in Washington, D.C. In fact, she would often go to work, sit in the gallery, and watch the proceedings in the House of Representatives. Well, Hayes was reelected in 1866, but really wasn't actually having all that much fun. It was a very confrontational setting in the House of Representatives. It was hard to get work done. It really didn't fit his personality, and he was kind of looking for a way out, which came along in June of 1867. The Republicans back in Ohio decided to have Hayes go for governor. And Hayes was very excited about this opportunity. He said about being a congressman, "The truth is, this being errand boy to 150,000 people tires me." He didn't really want to be a congressman. Governor, on the other hand, I'm excited about that. So he resigned his seat, ready to make the race back in Ohio. The Republicans had dominated Ohio politics really since the middle of the 1850s, but that's been over a decade now, and the Democrats, post-war, starting to get a little bit of momentum, and they put Allen Thurman, a former congressman, former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, up against Hayes in the race for governor. It was a very active campaign. Hayes gave 81 speeches over the course of the 4 months. One of the hot topics, the rights of blacks, not just in the South, but also in Ohio. And Hayes came out on the campaign trail. He said, "They are not aliens or strangers. They're here by the misfortune of their fathers and the crime of ours. Their toil has added to the resources and wealth of the nation untold millions. Whether we prefer it or not, they are our countrymen and will remain so forever. Our government is not the government of any class or sect or nationality or race. It is not the government of the native-born or of the foreign-born, of the rich man or of the poor man, of the white man or of the colored man. It is the government of the free man. It is the government of the governed." This was the view of Rutherford Hayes as he was running for governor. Well, in ways, it was a bit of a wave election for the Democrats in Ohio. They won both houses in the state legislature. The votes for the 14th Amendment actually went down decisively to defeat, but there was one exception. Rutherford Hayes. He won his seat as governor of the state by about 3,000 votes. What was really decisive? The soldier vote almost entirely went for Hayes. So January 13th, 1868, he is sworn in as the first of 2 terms as governor of Ohio. Now, he's had a bit of a weak hand. The governor of Ohio did not have veto power, so the Democrats that now dominated the state legislature could pretty much pass any legislation they wanted, and there wasn't really anything he could do about it. But he still had an agenda of his own. On the economy, he wanted to pay down the debt, and he was proud to pay off $3 million of that debt during his tenure as governor. He also was very aligned with the new president, Ulysses Grant, on this idea of hard currency, to be able to get rid of the debts that are in greenbacks and get back to a specie-based economy. Hayes was all on board with this perspective. He was also for improving the lot in Ohio, both in prisons and in asylums, perhaps thinking back to when his own sister Fanny had been hospitalized in an asylum. He wanted those environments to have a better situation. He also oversaw the creation of a new college in Columbus, the Agricultural and Mechanical College. We now know it as The Ohio State University, started on his watch. In many ways, this governor thing was a perfect job for the affable Rutherford Hayes. He told his uncle Sardis that "it strikes me as the pleasantest position I have ever had. Not too much hard work, plenty of time to read, good society, etc." Kind of made for the personality of Rutherford Hayes. He had plenty of time to spend with his family, had a couple of more kids. Fanny and Scott came along to add to the family. And when the legislature was not in session, Hayes would travel all corners of the state. He was very personable. He loved meeting the people. It was not taxing. He really enjoyed this part of being governor. Now, in his second term, he had a little bit more challenging tasks that he took on, including civil service reform. Now, this was a topic that was starting to percolate both at the state level and nationally, and it was controversial. It was all about political patronage, where office holders would hand out jobs to supporters. Frankly, whether or not they were competent, what didn't really matter. The idea was, you support me, I'll get you a job. You support me some more, I'll get you more jobs. And it becoming sort of a corrupt kind of nature where the purpose of politicians was really just to keep this patronage chain going. And Hayes was disgusted by this whole thing. He wanted to take it on. He made some limited progress in the state of Ohio while he was governor in this area, but he was on record that in the future national contest, this was going to be a big deal for Rutherford Hayes. Something else that really mattered to him is taking care of the orphans who were left orphans as a result of the Civil War. He believed the state owed it to take care of these children. According to Hayes, during the War for the Union, the people of this state acknowledged their obligation to support the families of their absent soldiers and undertook to meet it not as a charity, but as a partial compensation justly due for services rendered. It is the uniform testimony of the directors of county infirmaries that those institutions are wholly unfit for children. Left by the death of their patriotic fathers in this deplorable condition, it is the duty of the state to assume their guardianship and to provide support, education, and homes to all who need them. He advocated that the state take over the Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home in Xenia, Ohio. It became a personal priority for both him and Lucy. They put a lot of attention, personal attention, into making that institution much more successful and something he was very proud of. Black suffrage. This was another key thing on the watch of Rutherford Hayes. It was important to him. Another amendment to the Constitution had come from Congress, the 15th Amendment, which would say that nobody in the country could deny the right to vote based simply on race. Barely, it was a close race in the state of Ohio to get this thing passed. Rutherford Hayes lobbied hard for it. It passed the House by 2 votes. It passed the Senate by 1 vote. And the 15th Amendment was in fact ratified by the state of Ohio. And Hayes was triumphant, a triumph of justice and humanity. It represents the final overthrow of the atrocious system which the Republican Party was organized to oppose. By the adoption of the 15th Amendment, the principles of the fathers will be fully recognized in the Constitution. At this point, Hayes was ready to stand down. Ready to stand down from politics. No one had ever served 3 terms as governor of Ohio, and at this point, Hayes was not interested in trying. Some of his friends wanted him to challenge John Sherman, the incumbent senator, to try to take on his coming up open seat in the Senate, and Hayes said, no, I'm for Sherman, let him win again, which he did, and Hayes was ready to go home. In fact, in January of 1872, when he was walking out of the governorship, he said, I am a free man and jolly as a beggar. What was next for Rutherford Hayes? At this point, even he didn't know. So that makes it story for another day. That is Rutherford Hayes and Politician, from the life of Rutherford Hayes. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.